uh, before we get into the larger topics, it's always interesting to know, how do people get involved in this business? How did you climb into the hydrogen business?
Well, to be honest, it started pretty young. I was in high school as a senior and tasked with a research project into renewable energies. We had to pick a form. On a Google search, I saw hydrogen fuel cells, and I said, what is that? And after writing a report later, I got enthusiastic, fell in love with the abundant hydrogen atom, and felt it was such an elegant solution to generate electricity through a fuel cell, and just the way it works electrochemically. I was fascinated as an engineer, and just kind of latched on from there.
And you've been there ever since. Do you have a penchant for consuming the products that are available? Do you drive a car?
Yes, in fact. So I am privileged to drive a Honda Clarity, which I understand is not available in Europe, I believe.
We just heard from the last lecture. It said there are hydrogen fuel cell cars here, but the Clarity has not made it yet.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. It's a fabulous car. It's fast, it's comfortable, it's fun, it's easy to fuel. In fact, I've been in Europe now for 2 weeks at a handful of events talking about California. My girlfriend likes to drive my car when I'm gone, and she actually was a little bit nervous about fueling it because it's foreign, and there's questions about safety that we need to continue to address and educate. But I said, come on, you should go to the station. I've shown you how to do it. Just go. And so I was happy to see a video of her fueling the car last weekend, and so I'm very proud to be able to share that.
It sounds like a piece of humor, but it's actually a serious issue. People do not know that getting rear-ended in a hydrogen fuel cell car is a lot safer than getting rear-ended in a standard gasoline engine-driven car. It's a very safe technology, and they're a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely.
So one thing I realize in Anaheim, California, is things are really happening there. I liken California to Canada unfairly. Actually, a larger population, far larger economy, and it plays such a key role in the American economy. But right now, internationally, so much is happening in California related to hydrogen technology.
Absolutely.
Why California?
Well, I think California has demonstrated that there needs to be an attention to the emissions problem, particularly air quality. So back in the 1970s, the California Air Resources Board started to set forth a bunch of actions to try to address the terrible smog problem we have in Los Angeles and in the Central Valley of California. And so through the years, there's been more and more measures taken. And when you talk about ports, in 2006, the Clean Air Action Plan was formed by the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And so what this did was set forward a number of motions to try to clean up the air. And the ports have done a great job, and they're continuing to work towards cleaning up it even more. And the level of smog in Los Angeles has definitely decreased in the last 40 years, but it still has a bit way to go. So I would like to see the mountains in the back of Los Angeles more often than I currently do sitting in my house in Venice Beach.
Yeah, because of course the landscape is beautiful there. You have a graphic with you, I believe, of... am I jumping the gun here?
That's right. So what you can see on the screen is actually a picture of air quality. And something I want to point out with the red circle is the corridor between the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach and the major railhead that goes to the rest of the country. So half of the goods in the United States come through these ports because we get them from Asia. And so we have a lot of Chinese terminals there. And all of those trucks are all of those terminals put containers onto the trucks that have to go up the freeway. And so what we find is the communities that are living on each side of the freeway are disproportionately burdened with this commerce that has to happen for the United States. So this basically led the ports to do a series of actions and push forward the technology advancement program, and they're trying to change the equipment that's being used in the ports and around the ports to address the particulate matter and climate pollutants that are in this area. This is actually called a cancer corridor, and the community of Wilmington, right behind Long Beach, has one of the highest cancer rates in the country, the United States. So definitely cannot be ignored.
These are similar issues which you're addressing better than we are in many areas in Europe, but similar issues to Europe. In major cities, you'll discover that streets with larger volumes of traffic, actually the rents are lower there because there's a direct correlation between the rates of cancer Isn't this crazy? We're worried about other things, but if you happen to have kids in a large city, you should be worried about this because
Absolutely.
it affects young lungs far more than old guys like us. Well, comparatively speaking, so it is a major issue. Does that play into policy decisions in a manner where you can really objectively see they learn about the issue and then they address the issue? For instance, diesel.
Yes, and what we did in California in July 2016 was release the Sustainability Freight Action Plan, Sustainable Freight Action Plan. And Governor, at that time, Governor Brown set forward an executive order to change the freight system in California. And the ports are addressing this today and trying to change over the trucks and equipment. So I'll show you those that are coming up here.
It's always thrilling because we talk about America and generalize. Often they include Canada, isn't it nuts? America. But
Well, don't forget South America, too. I have friends that live in Argentina, and whenever I say, oh, yeah, going back to America, they say, you mean the United States.
Yes.
That's true.
But one has to remind oneself that environmental policies in California are in several areas stricter than they are in Germany.
True.
So there's
And we
progress
still
there.
have, we have problems with containment, which is why we have to take different measures to change these vehicles.
Yes, and being a corridor for the rest of the United States, I never realized that before
Absolutely.
until you showed that graphic. That is so key. So you're really addressing problems in California that affect the rest of the country.
Yes.
So
We try to set a trend in California. We try to be thought leaders and progressive than the rest of the nation.
we're all praying for success on
Yeah,
that level.
yeah.
Okay. Of course, business council means you're also interested in business. That means getting up marketable products,
For sure.
making sure they're being implemented,
Correct.
educating on the economic viability of these products. So what sort of products do you have to show?
Well, I'm going to show you a few projects that we have going on in California. So we'll start with the Port of Long Beach. This is a demonstration of a fuel cell yard tractor head-to-head with a battery yard tractor. And so what the Port of Long Beach is going to do at the Long Beach Container Terminal, with help from funding from the California Air Resources Board, is see exactly how these vehicles will perform, how much weight they can pull, how far in the day they can go before they need to be refueled or recharged. And so this is a great learning opportunity for the Port Authority of Long Beach as they work towards implementing a sort of a developing, not necessarily a mandate yet, but there's a goal to move towards zero-emission terminal equipment by 2030. So I've been to some of these advisory meetings, and the container terminals are freaking out a little bit. So this is very important to show the viability of a zero-emission technology and the potential superiority of a fuel cell yard tractor versus a battery yard tractor. So we find that very interesting. In the Port of Los Angeles, there should be, boom, boom. Uh-oh. Next one? Next, yeah, okay. So the Port of Los Angeles also has a yard tractor. They have 2 yard tractors. This is by Ballard. So again, a Port Authority trying to see the viability of the technology. It's good that both the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, because they have their own environmental and their own teams, are each seeing the results of this technology. So this is exciting, and hopefully we'll see this implemented in about a year. So the controller is on, so we'll go to the next one. Also in Port of Los Angeles, a top handler. So Nuvera is actually owned now by Hyster-Yale. And Neheim in Netherlands, which I've actually been there to their big truck center and seen this behemoth in action. It is impressive, it is imposing, and it is exciting, because what this shows is that the technology is really suited for heavy-duty, energy-dense applications. You can't put the number of batteries required on this vehicle and still be able to do the normal work. And furthermore, the actual work process and how these vehicles are refueled, there's a diesel refueler that goes around the terminals. So with this tractor, you're going to have a hydrogen refueler doing the exact same thing. So there is actually not a return to base for some of these terminal pieces of equipment. And so the charging infrastructure is essentially inconvenient. But the only places that what they do run around a lot when they're moving containers, they will have some inductive charging capability, which is an interesting portion of this project. So 2 pieces of port equipment, what we find very interesting. Now we're moving on to trucks. Trucks are personal to me. I started in the Vision Industry Corporation in 2009. I worked for 5 years as an electrical engineer, and we procured the world's first hydrogen fuel cell 18-wheeler prototype, the same size as that truck, in 2012. Well, 2012 was a little bit early for this sort of technology, and there's a lot of skepticism. And to be honest, we were using a hydrogenic fuel cell that wasn't really built for a heavy-duty application. And so we were a bit ahead of our time, and the company ended up folding in 2014, unfortunately. So this is a nice reincarnation of that idea, and this is 10 hydrogen fuel cell trucks. So what you find interesting here is Toyota, a major player in the light-duty market. We have all the Mirais on the road. And then you see them playing a role as a powertrain provider for heavy-duty vehicles. So they're getting involved with PACCAR, they're getting involved with Kenworth. They're a reliable supplier for Kenworth, being able to give them unneeded spare parts and support that they need. And 4 different companies are going to be testing this technology. So 4 different trucking companies on different routes, different distances, going into what we call the Inland Empire, where we put a lot of freight from the ports themselves. And there will be 2 hydrogen stations that will be built out of this project. So it's an $82 million project. $41 million were given from the state of California to get this done. So we're very excited about this, indeed. I wanted to leave you with what should be the world's first hydrogen fuel cell ferry. It's scheduled to hit the water by October of this year. So a gentleman by the name of Dr. Joseph Pratt was at the Sandia National Laboratory in Northern California and worked on a feasibility study for, I think, about 2 years on the concept of a hydrogen fuel cell passenger ferry. So this man left the lab on an entrepreneurial leave, started a company, Golden Gate Zero Emission Marine, got a grant from the state of California, and is building this right now, and hopefully we'll be able to see it in operation within 6 months. So this is incredibly exciting, and just goes to show that the attention is not only on the land side with equipment, but also on the water side. And we heard, I think, from Trond earlier about Hyon, how important it's going to be to transition the shipping in the maritime sector, so both land and sea.
We'll have to get back to the trucks, but just to stay on the subject, one would think of applications. So why this? Just recently off the coast of Norway, a cruise ship almost sank, which sounded like a tragedy to many people, except for the people who live in the fjords, who was thinking, please go down, because these things with their diesel-powered technology go into the fjords. The gas can't go anywhere. So it's kind of like valleys through Austria before they built the trains for all of the freight. They go into the fjords, and it's horrible for the population that lives there. There are applications for these things.
Yeah, and as we heard earlier, they are transitioning a lot of these ferries in Norway to zero emission, and there's a mandate that the cruise ships themselves will have to go zero emission into these fjords, rightfully so. As you mentioned, the population is complaining. A similar situation in California. You have mountains that entrap these local climate pollutants, and it's just, you have to address this, and you can't let them sit there. I'm very excited, hopefully, to visit Florida, Norway for the Maritime conference coming up in September. So that'll be my first actual eyewitness account of the fjord for myself.
So to return to the truck issue here, I find it interesting because technologies often in their development, they do a dual service. One, of course, they manage to provide cleaner emissions transportation, which is so important for an area like California, which, as you mentioned, is the port for a lot of goods that arrive from Asia.
Yep.
The second thing, though, is trucking is an artery that flows right across the United States.
Yes.
Once you get that up and running, you also install, in order to make that viable, a hydrogen fueling network that goes right across the continent. So it has this
something
payoff.
we've heard a lot about recently, right?
Yeah. It has this double payoff. This is incredibly important because in California, they're basically setting the signs for the future. The other thing that I wanted to return to is the anything involved in logistics, like the forklift truck. For me, it's fascinating. This is proven technology. These are not experimental units.
No, not at all. There's 23,000 fuel cell forklifts, and these are the smaller forklifts that you find in warehouses and distribution centers. But nevertheless, 23,000 are around in the United States, and companies like Plug Power have done a great job at delivering a value proposition that makes sense economically, without subsidies, for reasoning to use these hydrogen fuel cell forklifts. And a lot of it has to do with indoor environmental conditions. It's cold. So a lot of cold storage, a lot of movement of cold items in warehouses, and batteries simply just don't do very well in those environments. But fuel cells can do well.
And in the logistics, I mean, over the years, I've seen these products come and go and come and go, but the logistics were our first big market for fuel cells.
Definitely.
And one of the glories of that market was the fact that you have battery-driven vehicles. It's kind of like electrical charged vehicles in that they take so damn long to fill up. You're competing with a hydrogen fuel cell forklift truck that is fillable in 3 minutes, basically. And
That's
they
right.
discovered a number of things. One is that it took, you had to have 3 units. These are 24/7 operating logistics centers, like the Post.
That's right.
You needed
Another advantage.
Yeah, you needed 3 units if they're conventional batteries, or just 1 unit if it's a fuel cell, which made these things incredibly affordable. And the one issue that they had, which they've already solved, was the fuel cell forklift trucks were so light that they had to weight them down sometimes.
That's right.
So you have the option of using metal hydride storage tanks because
Right.
they're heavier.
That's advantageous to use that.
But they're fun to drive, and that was like the first model where we actually got into volume.
Indeed.
So I mentioned at the beginning that among the huge supports for the industry, which is international, but we have to find our local markets here, was the California Hydrogen Business Council. There we were in Anaheim. It was the second time we were there in the United States. California has a huge interest because they have this abundant resource called sun energy, solar power. And
A lot of
then
sun.
you know,
We compete with Florida to be the Sunshine State.
Yeah.
We really do. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I think we're winning that battle. So.
and the better oranges, by the way.
Well, I think you said it, not me.
But what it boils down to is you need to be able to store this energy.
Absolutely.
And when you're thinking in large volumes, you cannot do this with batteries. So hydrogen, affordable, inexpensive hydrogen is going to be an abundant resource, and now we need the applications. So the speakers you provided us, including yours truly, of course, it was just a huge support. I have to keep track of your events. What are your next public appearances, and what are you going to be doing at the
Well,
council?
the Business Council is very focused on this sector of trucks and port equipment. So in the sector of freight, coming up on April 23rd in Long Beach, California, if you want to get out of this cold, which I really don't appreciate, you can come to Long Beach, and we'll have a workshop in the afternoon hearing from OEMs, hearing from the actual companies that are running these trucks. We'll also hear some comparisons between battery, fuel cell, and incumbent technologies. So we invite you on that. This is part of a larger show called the ACT Expo, Alternative Clean Transportation Expo, which is getting bigger every year and has a number of people there, including Trevor Milton from Nikola will be there and making a speech. And so this is definitely a reason to show up in Long Beach the week of April 23rd. And so I also want to mention, in case you go to Vancouver for the F-Cell that's happening, we have a workshop there that's going to be focused on ports and maritime in the afternoon. So you can find us there on that Tuesday. I think that's May 21st, if that's correct. And then in the fall, we have our annual Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in Ports and Maritime workshop. And so we're just continuing to have a presence in Los Angeles at the port themselves to try to bring internal operators, bring in the port authorities, the legislative agencies as well, and just have a discussion about some of the barriers that we need to overcome and the progress that we've really made in the last few years. So we're excited about all of that. And I will lastly mention we have our annual summit. I think it's going to be in the summer. We're still determining. That kind of touches on all the sectors that we have inside the Business Council with 110 members across all sectors.
And so this is our 25th annual exhibit. Are we going to get you back here next year? Are you going to be here?
Potentially. Yeah, if you have it later in the month of April, so it's a little bit warmer, I'll come back.
Okay, it used to be later in April. We're working on that. We're all working on that. Yeah. Cory, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I've been talking to
You as
Cory
well.
Shumaker, who is a development specialist at the California Hydrogen Business Council. Thanks again for the support that you gave us in Anaheim, California,
My pleasure.
and in Las Vegas, which
Yeah.
was fundamental.
You guys did a great job putting this on.
Thank you, thank you. We've moved, actually. We now have an American branch, and we're returning to Salt Lake City, of all things.
I heard.
Soon. So we're going international. It's a growing industry. And very much thanks to your support. So thank you
My
for
pleasure.
being here.
Brian, always a pleasure.